All right. Again, greetings, everyone. Welcome to our second Tuesday series, which, as I was just saying, is meeting on the third Tuesday of this month. We're really blessed to have Phoebe Farag Mikhail here. Phoebe is a accomplished writer and advocate and does a lot of amazing things, works in the development arena. And Phoebe has written a wonderful book about the Lenten season, which is the topic of our talk tonight that she's going to give, Writing in Lent. The title of her book is Hunger for Righteousness, A Lenten Journey Towards Intimacy with God and Loving Our Neighbor. I was really blessed to have a chance to read the book and talk to Phoebe about it a couple months ago. So I'm so grateful, Phoebe, that you're back to speak to us tonight about writing in Lent. Again, we'll have time for questions at the end, so please hold on to your questions. But Phoebe, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for bringing me back into the Writing for Your Life community. I have been so blessed to really learn so much from all the resources that Writing for Your Life has provided. So I'm so glad that I'm getting a chance to maybe share a little bit myself with you all. Kate did a pretty good introduction. My latest book is Hunger for Righteousness. I am also the author of Putting Joy into Practice, 7 Ways to Lift Your Spirit from the Early Church. That one came out in 2019. Some of my writing also appears on various outlets like Christianity Today, Faithfully, Sojourners, Plow, and other sources. I blog at Being in Community. I live in northern New Jersey, and that's where my church is and where I serve. Um, and I'm really glad to be with you all here today. Um, so I guess we can just go ahead and get started on our topic, which is writing for during Lent. My book is about Lent, so it's kind of a good a good combination of topics here. And so I think to start on this topic, for many writers, and I think especially for spiritual writers, um, writing isn't just a task or a job. It's often an expression of our connection with God. And Lent for many Christian traditions is the most sacred spiritual time because it leads up to the event that literally makes us Christians, Christ's crucifixion and resurrection from the dead. And so even though, different Christians practice different, Lent in different ways, no matter how we practice Lent, it is definitely a special time set aside with specific intention for many of us. And so that makes Lent for us as spiritual writers a great time to set specific intentions around our spiritual writing. And so in this conversation, I'm going to share 3 suggested intentions for spiritual writing during Lent, as well as a couple of caveats towards the end. So our first suggested intention, Lent can be a time for generating ideas. Generating ideas for writing, especially spiritual writing. Now, I've heard about authors who come up with their ideas for books in church, likely because church is where their minds can wander. Perhaps it's also because something sacred is happening there. Um, in my own book, Hunger for Righteousness, a few sections in there were initially drafted quickly in notes during church or inspired by events that happen in church. And Lent is a period of time when we often maybe gather a little bit more with our local spiritual communities, more than usual. Even authors who are not necessarily spiritual authors have confessed to, getting some of their ideas in church. For example, I don't know if you follow the author Laura Vanderkam. She's the author of multiple time management books, including Tranquility by Tuesdays, Off the Clock, and I Know How She Does It. And in this article that she wrote called The Secret to Becoming an Idea Machine, she says, confession time. I often come up with ideas in church. No, I don't go to worship services looking to brainstorm anything, far from it. But the conditions are so inadvertently perfect that ideas pop into my head unasked. Think about it. I'm sitting still without the distractions of the internet or my home. where my energetic impulse tends to manifest itself in emptying the dishwasher. I'm listening to beautiful music with challenging lyrics. I'm reading passages of literature that are very different from what's in the Wall Street Journal. The preacher is asking hard questions and presenting issues in ways I haven't thought about before. So I wind up writing a lot of one-word notes to myself that translate later. And there are others. There's another author called Ace Collins, who's written The Color of Justice, and he gets lots of books, ideas in church as well. Charlotte Rains Dixon, author of The Bonchance Bakery, takes notes and she says, I get some of my best ideas at church. And so she carries around a journal when she goes to church because they come up. And so, for whatever reason it is, if, like Laura Vanderkam says, if it's because of it's, lots of, the music and the reading something different and listening to the preacher's words, or because it is really a chance, or could could be slightly boring, but your mind is able to wander, who knows? And your mind, and actually boredom itself is actually a great way to foster creativity. If you've heard of Manoush Zomorodi's book, Bored and Brilliant, she talks a lot about how um, sometimes our creativity is stifled because we don't actually give ourselves enough time to just be bored and not be constantly stimulating ourselves with inputs from, the news and podcasts and reading and, all and audiobooks and all that's coming in. Sometimes just having time to not have all those inputs can actually lead to a lot greater productivity. Creativity. Um, so that's the first intention. The second intention is using the Great Lent to build a writing practice or discipline. So Lent is also often a time when we adopt a particular spiritual discipline or practice or revive one. For example, regular scripture reading. That's one that I talk about in my book, for example. And so there are many productivity gurus that recommend something called habit stacking. I don't know if you've ever heard of that phrase, habit stacking. And that's when we build a good habit by stacking it or connecting it with something that we already do. And so, if we're already building a spiritual habit during Lent, and so, like I said, it could be daily scripture reading, right? It could be praying a specific prayer in the morning, it could be a specific daily time of meditation, some sort of spiritual practice that we've decided we're going to be doing during Lent. We might use habit stacking to attach a good writing habit to it. So for example, the daily scripture reading, I've been working on that habit. And so perhaps immediately after that habit, I might stack it with taking a few minutes to journal or taking some time to work on my current writing project. So often that spiritual habit itself that you're trying to build up can end up generating new ideas, as we mentioned in the first intention. The third intention is using the time that we have gained because of the room that we've made during Lent. Lent is often a time when we reduce many of the inputs that we have in our lives. Some of us, for example, might do some people do social media fasts during Lent. Um, or many of us might reduce the amount of food that we eat or even abstain, or just eat very more simply, spend a little bit less time focusing on food and doing other things. Some of us might reduce our like financial spending during Lent. And all of these things that we kind of reduce gives us more time. And so Lent is an opportunity to use some of that opened up time for doing more writing, or doing some of that writing, generating, or doing more journalism. Doing more journaling, for example. Now, here's the caveats. As we set our spiritual intentions for Lent, we might also consider how we will use the season for our spiritual writing. All of my suggestions above sound like I'm suggesting more writing, but we should not push ourselves into more productivity if it's time better spent in reflection and restoration. So during Lent 2024, I had the manuscript deadline for Hunger for Righteousness um due at, right at the end of Lent. And so that was a Lent where I had to be a productive writer. There wasn't a choice in the matter. However, the book aligned so well to the season that it felt like part of my Lenten practice, right? I was writing a book about Lent and it was Lent, made a lot of sense, right? This Lent, I'm actually in working on my third book. And so at the beginning of this Lent, I kind of intentionally focused on the research part of the book. So, and it includes a lot more spiritual reading that I think will be quite restorative to me, even if the research doesn't end up in my book, right? And then after Lent is when I'm going to focus more on putting words on the page. Um, so that's kind of, the intention that I set during this Lent. Still, if I feel the urge coming on to write, I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop the urge, right? So we might decide that this period of time is the time to release ourselves completely from the push for productivity, the push to put words on paper. And maybe we might decide to spend it instead nourishing ourselves spiritually and creatively. So that might indeed mean more time in church, more contemplative time, more time spent in nature, more time in reading for pleasure, more time in reading for spiritual growth, more time serving others and reaching out to our communities. So when we think about our intentions for Lent, we could decide that we're not going to try to push ourselves to be productive at all in our writing lives. We could decide that it's a time instead for reflection and restoration. Finally, some of you may have heard of the term Lenti Lent. Has anybody raised your hand or give me like a thumbs up? Have you ever heard of the term a Lenti Lent? No? Okay. Um, for if you actually like search it on the internet, like you'll even find people have made t-shirts with this where sometimes it seems that Lent is when everything goes wrong. This is when the plumbing stops working, right? Or this is when we get into arguments with people we usually get along with. In my first book, Putting Joy into Practice, I told the story of one of the lentiest Lents I ever had. And that was when we had a sewage flood in my basement. And it was a disaster. Something went wrong with the town trying to clean up its sewer line, and the town's sewage backed up into my house instead. And it was so bad. It was so bad that the people who come to clean, the companies that come to clean up after the fire and, after fires and floods and all of that, it was so bad that they came and they said, "This is the worst we've ever seen." So the disaster people came and said, "This is a disaster." And that was a very Lenty Lent, right? This is a Lent where I didn't do any writing. I spent most of my time, documenting everything they were about to put in the dumpster so I can, put it on, give it to insurance. It was a very Lenty Lent. And it often feels like when stuff like this happens during this period, it's almost like the devil kind of wants to derail us from our plans of getting closer to God and loving our neighbor during the Lenten season by trying to force us to focus on our own problems. And so sometimes even our best intentions get derailed when things like this come up. So when this happens, it's okay to set aside, whatever grand plans we might have had for the season, right? And it's okay to set those aside, take care of what needs to be taken care of, and then come back to our initial focus and try again. And this is often just the Christian life, right? It's always that falling up, down, and getting back up again, taking a few steps back and then taking a few steps forward. And so this is no different either. If we are facing challenges, and indeed there are lots of challenges that can come up now, and even not now, even after Lent. So Lent, this is the time where, if it happens, we just, do what we need to do and then refocus and then come back to our initial focus and try again. So, for a quick review, I mentioned three different intentions, and I'm going to do this quick review because I'm going to open up to ask you about what resonated with you. The three suggested intentions were first, a time for using Lent as a time for generating ideas. The second is using Lent as a time for building a writing practice or a spiritual discipline. And we could use something called habit stacking to do that, if we'd like. And then the third intention is using the time that we gain during Lent, because we've reduced a lot of the inputs in our lives, the time and the space, the room that we've made during Great Lent, to focus on, to do a little bit more of the writing or the idea generation. And then our two caveats are, perhaps Lent might be the time where we actually don't be productive at all. And if we get all of our plans derailed, if we have a particularly Lenty Lent, then it's okay. We can, just take a pause, do what we need to do, and then try to go back to the intention, which is why one of the things I also recommend at the beginning of Lent too is to actually just write down like what we plan to do, make a decision about how we plan to both grow in our relationship with God during this time, and then also um, strengthen our own spiritual writing practice during this time, to kind of write it down somewhere, like in a journal. Um, and then that way, if things go wrong, if things get derailed, we can still go back and say, okay, so what is it that I had decided to do? Let me go ahead and make that decision. And make that decision again and just start again. Lent is 40 days, so we've got time. If we lost 20 of those days because of a problem, we can always use the latter 20. And if it just doesn't work out, well, there's always the resurrection to reset and try again. So, with that being said, I would love to hear from you, and I'm happy to hear, both, if you want to, if it's okay, if you want to just speak into the microphone, or if you'd like to share in the chat, which of these intentions that I shared resonate with you during this Lenten season. And we are actually, um, if you're Orthodox like I am, we're already 3 weeks in. And I think for everybody else, it's about a week, or is it 2 weeks? How
I
far are
think
we
two
now?
weeks. I
It's
think
two
two
weeks.
weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we still have what, 3 more weeks to go, right? So we're still sort of in the beginning half. So if you could share like what you've decided to focus on, and which of these intentions resonate with you as a spiritual writer during this Lenten season.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. That's really just both sort of really helpful, concrete advice and also inspiring. So I want to open the floor to Phoebe's invitation to sort of share your reactions or questions or comments, and maybe I can kick us off with a reaction and a sort of comment question. Um, so I loved what you said about idea generation in church, and I've had several epiphanies and sort of ideations in during worship services, so that I'd never made the sort of connection, but that really
Mhm.
makes sense. So thank you for that, sort of naming that. One thing that you didn't talk about that I'm curious what your reaction to that I've been thinking about related to this topic is repentance, and sort of what as writers we need, spiritual writers, we need to repent of. And I just heard a sermon recently where um, the preacher was talking about sort of the temptation to be famous and famous on TikTok, or sort of um, the next Instagram personality or whatever. And I think for spiritual writers, this can be a huge temptation and pressure from like industry leaders. And sort of, this preacher was talking about sort of an attitude. This is a time for like an attitude check. I've heard other writer coaches talk about it as like mindset work. And so I'm
Mm.
curious what you think about that. It's such a tension of like, what is your motivation to write in the first place? And do you need to repent of sort of self-cherishing, turn yourself back to God's call? I don't know. I just was wondering if you could say anything about that. Thank you. And then I'm going
Yeah.
to look at the comments coming in. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's such a wonderful observation. I'm glad you brought it up. I do talk about repentance in my book, more specific, more generally, as Christians. Lent is definitely a period where we should spend some time repenting, right? Repenting for our own struggles, for our own sins, and also repenting as a community for what we might have fallen short of. Um, as a community. And um, I think as you were speaking, it comes to my mind something really interesting about the word um, the word for sin in the New Testament, and the Greek word for sin is actually the meaning is to miss the mark. And so maybe think, if I connect that to what you said about some of the struggles we might particularly have as writers, some of those temptations that we face, like you said, some of the motivation may be for fame as opposed to for sharing something authentic, for example. That's a question that what we might ask ourselves is, how in my path to writing, in my pursuit of this path, have I missed the mark? So what is my, and then thinking about what is my actual purpose? What's my purpose? And where in my path to that purpose have I missed the mark? Have I kind of derailed my own self? Due to some of those struggles that you mentioned, that, is if it's pride, vainglory, uh, or even just the temptation to focus on those things that the marketers want you to focus on, the number of followers that you have, the platform that you build, all those things that are only really tangentially important, as a tangential to the real work, which is to, when you're a spiritual writer, which is really to um inspire other, draw people closer to God in your writing, inspire others, draw them into deeper contemplation, let them see things in a new way, or whatever, whatever your particular purpose. I'm sure you've attended, plenty of those workshops where you have, write your, like, your author's, what's that, your author's, and it's not author's intent. What is it? It's the, like your own personal purpose in writing, your artist statement, right? Like, write your artist statement or your manifest. Thank you, Carol. Somebody wrote your manifesto. So, we all have that, and that's another great way too, to, when you think about missing the mark, going back to the thing that you might have written about, your artist, go back to your artist statement and say, am I still true to that intention that I set, or that purpose that I have for my writing, or have I missed the mark? Have I gone off on the wrong path of perhaps pursuing fame, more so than pursuing righteousness? So thank you for that comment, Kate. That's a really thoughtful, a really insightful way of looking at this.
Well, thank you, Phoebe. Some folks are commenting on kind of what they got. Before I read comments from the meeting chat bar, does anybody want to come off mute and add a comment or a question?
I had a comment. I was the first one she said was time for generating spiritual ideas. I oftentimes in service, and good evening, it was a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thanks.
I oftentimes, when we're singing the hymnal, I'm not singing, I'm looking at the bottom where they have in the very tiny print either about the origin of the song or the composer of the song. And I learned about a Black composer, Harry Burleigh, who I'd never heard about. And he wrote some songs for Anton Dvorak. And a lot of people hear about Dvorak, but not Harry Burleigh. So I get ideas from those unknown inspirations. And I get excited about that. So I don't even, sorry, I sometimes don't even get through singing the song because I'm too busy reading down at the bottom. Or if there's a scripture that we read, they've read the scripture, I've gone on to the whole passage. They may read 3 to 5. I'm all the way down to verse 24. So and I get inspiration from that. And so while the minister is preaching, I'm writing different ideas and I'm supposed to be focused. And I do it driving sometimes too. I would not advise anybody to do that because I do that driving sometimes too. So so general ideas come, but being intentional is something that I was not. So today I'm gonna write this down. I'm gonna be more intentional with my writing. So thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's great.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Well, we have a comment from, it's either, I'm not sure if it's Tamara or Tamara, or, yeah, I'll say Tamara, but come off mute if I pronounced it incorrectly, who wrote in the
It's
chat that
Tamar.
she's Tamara.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
Tamar.
Tamara. Okay, great. And maybe Tamara, if you want, since you've come off mute, maybe do you want to say a little bit more about your comment, or do you want me to read it?
So I'll tell. So hello everyone. This is my first time joining. But as I was listening in, and she got to talking about building a platform and having the wrong desire, right? Last year I had a platform. I'd had it since 2013, and I scrubbed the whole thing. And so, as you were talking about kind of the the fight between what everyone's expecting, like you need a platform so that you can get your works out there, versus I want to have my platform so that I can be seen, known, and get popular. Like that really resonated with me. So thank you for touching on that.
Yeah, and Phoebe, maybe you can say a little bit. Thank you so much, Tamara. Welcome for your first time being here. It's great to have you. Phoebe, maybe you want to say a little bit more about platform building, because I know, as you know, we've already talked a little bit about it as we were saying, but I do think that the writer's life these days sort of has the dual roles of writing and what many people call platform building, although that's a complicated phrase. So I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Um, I think it's a real struggle for us. I think that writers in the past didn't always have to the load of making yourself kind of known out there wasn't always there for writers. But at the same time, that also meant there were fewer writers out there to know about. The gatekeepers, there was more gatekeeping, right? And so to just even have your words out there and printed um, was a bigger challenge as well than it is now. So I would say that the platform building piece can be both a challenge, but also an opportunity. And um, I think one of the ways that I have kind of reconciled myself to that, added sort of responsibility of, building a platform as an author is to think of it less as about making myself famous or making myself an influencer or making myself known, but using the various ways of communication um uh to share uh to share my words effectively, if you understand what I'm saying, so that it's not so much about um just getting a lot of followers, getting a lot of subscribers, but more about um having something to share and sharing it effectively on the various different kinds of platforms there are, if you know what I'm saying, or the various kinds of outlets that there are. Um, so for example, I have a blog, and when I have an idea for an essay or some thoughts that I think I'd like to share, I might start working on it, and then as I work on it, decide, should I pitch this to an outlet or should I put this on my blog? I might try pitching it, and then nobody picks it up, and then I say, but you know what? I feel like this is something I want to share. And so I go ahead and I just post it on my blog. And then this happened a couple of times where like a particular piece never got really like a home, but then it became one of the most popular pieces on my blog. And so I was like, I'm glad that maybe I felt a little bit of that sting of rejection for people not wanting to publish it. But then I get the affirmation of people still finding those words and resonating with them. Similarly, like looking at the different kinds of places, for example, where you would share your stuff. Instagram is different from Twitter, which is different from Facebook, and each of those kind of has their own flavor. And it might be that we use those places for different purposes. For example, back in the day when Twitter was Twitter, I found that it wasn't that I actually found it more useful for me to just meet other writers than it was about me like trumpeting my work. And so that's what I did. I decided that was not going to be where I was going to look for a lot of followers. It was going to be where I met other writers and learned about other people's work and kind of like form that kind of a community. And so I think if we kind of think about the various ways that we've been told that we need to be out there, and instead use those ways to think about how they are either going to be places where we can share our words effectively, or places where we could build community um, in ways that are helpful to us, then it's no longer about making myself famous and just more about, just being part of that, being part of the world, in the world and communicating with people in the various different ways. And because we're writers, we communicate with our words. So there are opportunities to do so. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, does make sense. And there's been a lot of comments in the chat, or several, about resonating with your comment about generating ideas during Lent. And so perhaps some of this kind of idea generation could also be focused on sort of the platform building side and kind of creating intentionality during Lent. Are there others who want to come off mute to ask a question or make a comment? You can either raise your hand with the icon or kind of wave, or just come off mute, since not everybody has the ability to raise their hand with the icon. Well, and I have another question that I'm ready to ask, but go ahead, Refried Bean.
Yes, hello, Phoebe. It was an awesome talk, and I really like the Orthodox Church. I think it's really cool you're Orthodox. And I just want to tell you, I haven't observed Lent since college, when I gave up sugar and it was just too much for me, and I haven't participated in 25 years. But your talk is like, it kind of helps me want to participate again. So I think y'all probably find a way. Maybe it'll be through writing, but it might be normal. It might be normal church. So thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks for that, Refried Bean. And maybe we can zoom that out into a question, Phoebe, which is for those who maybe don't come from a practice that's like a liturgical practice where Lent is sort of part of it. How would you recommend to beginners kind of getting involved with Lent, whether they're writers or not?
So yeah, I do recognize there are some traditions that really don't do much, don't do much at all, or don't even recognize Lent as a kind of a season. And so those who, like Refried Bean, who want to kind of come back into it, or observe it in their own way, I guess the first step would be to see if you are connected to a tradition, see what your tradition does, and maybe kind of plug back into that. And if you're not specifically connected to a tradition that practices Lent, I think really a good step is to just pick up there are some, not to say you should pick up my book specifically, although I welcome you to do so, but there are a lot of really great books about Lent that, that that are just great ways to kind of just think about the season in different ways. So, one, for example, is by Esau Macaulay. He has, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, Esau Macaulay. He has a book called Lent: A Season of Repentance. It's a very slim book, and I think he actually, I think, came from a tradition that wasn't very much into Lent. I believe he was a Baptist before he joined the Anglican Church, and so that's a really good kind of sort of introductory, um, uh, right, writing for somebody who wants to do Lent, right, but hasn't really ever done it. Hasn't ever really practiced it in any way before. There's also another. I'm trying to remember the name of this. There's another book that came out last year that was another beautifully written Lenten devotional. And if you'll give me a moment, I should be able to pull it up. Um, I think it's called A Different Kind of Lent. Let me see if that's A Different Kind of Fast. Feeding, it's called Feeding Our True. I'm trying to get the full title here. It's written by Christine Walters Painter, and it's called A Different Kind of Fast, Feeding Our True Hungers in Lent. So that's another a really great book I'd recommend for the season. There's also a um, a book. I think it's a collection by Sarah Arthur. I don't remember the exact title, but if you look it up, and it's a book with just selections, like literary selections for the season. That would be a great way to just, even if you decide to just like read those, every day, a literary selection from it. If I could just, I'll try to remember the name of that book. Um, Lent. Yes, a literary Between Midnight and Dawn, a literary guide to prayer for Lent, Holy Week, and Eastertide by Sarah Arthur. So there are three, and then of course you can always pick up my book if you want.
And Carol had another suggestion, a UK author, Janet Morley, a book called The Heart's Time, a poem a day for Lent and Easter. And she says that there's a poem, reflection, and question for each day.
Mhm.
She found that to be a useful companion.
Yeah.
Well, and while I have the mic again, Phoebe, I'll give a shout out to your book, and again, maybe sort of ask a question, leapfrogging from that, and then open the mics to others again. But one thing I really appreciated about your book was the focus on Lent as a community practice or a communal practice, and not just sort of an individual practice. And correct me if I'm saying that wrong, but as I was thinking about this talk, and I may be putting you on the spot, but if you could just tell us a little bit about that perspective that you bring in your book of sort of the community aspect or communal aspect of Lent. And then again, I'm curious if you sort of think that has any implications for us as writers, perhaps even just coming together tonight in community is a good example of that. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, definitely. Coming together as a community is a great example of that. And so in the book, I particularly reach into the Orthodox tradition of practicing Lent, which is that it is very much so a community something that we do together as a community. And so at the start of Lent, for example, people typically don't decide what they give up, because the whole church decides everybody has basically a Lenten diet, so to speak. We in the Coptic Orthodox Church, for example, we pretty much eat vegan throughout the season, and some of us will also abstain from eating until a certain period of time during the day, and that's usually something that is, discussed with like your spiritual, your spiritual guide, your mentor, your spiritual father, where you might, you could decide what time of the day you will break your fast and eat. Of course, all of these have their exceptions. Not everybody can, uh, you know, fast in this way for health reasons, for various reasons. Sometimes people can't do that, but for the most part, it's something that we kind of embark on the season together, doing that kind of thing. And then also, of course, all the other things I mentioned, which is we go to church a lot more. There is definitely a lot more spiritual reading, and the idea is that Lent is really a time of greater, it is a time of spiritual struggle. And so the church recognized that in that struggle, we shouldn't be doing it by ourselves. We should be working together. Um, we should be working together towards that. Sometimes it also means, for example, that we need to be repenting together too. Um, and it also means that we should be working together to love our neighbor. Um, and so, kind of to that question that you posed, Kate, about us as writers, absolutely, that could be a fourth intention, actually, and it could be very much, how do I plug myself into a writers community um, during this period? Perhaps it is, for example, coming together for this kind of a conversation. Maybe it's a good time to participate in a workshop alongside other writers, so that I can kind of bounce ideas off of one another. It could be a great time to create a critique group together so that you can share feedback on each other's work. That might be another great intention to set during Lent, to really kind of build your own writers community. And I'm going to actually link that back to that question about platform, which is really, you could also think about it as a chance too to think about not so much platform, but about how can I build community through some of these different uh, um, uh, pathways that people tell us where we need to be, build our influence. Why not instead think about it as, where can I start building great relationships? What groups can I join and contribute to, and learn from, for example, if it's like something like Facebook or Substack or any one of those those outlets where we're supposed to have a presence, right? Instead of having a presence just for having a presence sake, think about it as, how can I build a community there um, instead.
Thank you so much. So are there others who want to come off mute? And Melanie, I might ask you, I know you put a comment in the chat about intention 2 and intention 3, and whether you might want to come off mute and say anything more about that. You mentioned particularly using the time gained during Lent. And I think, Phoebe, your examples of fasting are really compelling in terms of the space that some of that may create. Melanie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for the talk. It pulled me in quite a few directions. I am a writer. I've decided to say that, but I've not been published or anything. But I'm just intentionally writing. And two things that I didn't write there, but that came up, was this intention to write just as a conduit, if you want to say, to what is happening, and just your unique experience, rather than how it's going to be heard, how it's going to be felt, and how it's going to be seen. So I thought that was really like a very good message for me. And the other thing was the definition of sin. I'm not Orthodox, and so I really liked that definition. It sat really well with me. The things that I wrote on the chat was the idea of stacking like in Lent, I've been doing very, very religiously this a prayer time. And I just do the prayer time. I put down little notes as it comes, and it's a lone prayer. And just the idea that you had of stacking it with, I don't know, you said whatever, writing, not really journaling, but even just allowing for that time instead of just doing the 15 minutes or whatever, to just, allocate a little more time to just be in the space and write. Like, that was it was a good thought. Like for me, that was a really good thing. Also, the thing about time gained, to use it in different ways, like with the time gained, you say, oh, I do have this time, and then you just go on to do some kind of chore instead, like, finish up with something or the other, rather than just like lean into a bit of reading or writing, Yeah. Thank you so much. And thanks for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. And that's such a great point about, there are things that if you given the space could just fill up your time, unless you really do decide, make an actual decision. No, in this next hour that I used to use for whatever it is, for doom scrolling or whatever it is that I decided I'm not going to do as much of during this season, I'm going to do this instead, as opposed to suddenly deciding it's a good time to empty my dishwasher and reorganize my bookshelves or something. And I as you were speaking, Melanie, and you this thought came to my mind, just circling back to that topic too of community, and something that I write about in my book, which is that this idea of Lent is a time where we are trying to be, it's a time of hungering and thirsting for righteousness, and part of that is the definition of righteousness is in the title of the book: intimacy with God and loving our neighbor. And, in the book, I talk about things like, donating to food pantries, doing, sharing, giving time to others. And so I think sometimes as writers, we can kind of end up very lonely in our pursuit of our writing path. We're doing a lot of stuff on our own, and we can lose touch with kind of the reality around us. And so, even if it's not specifically joining a writer's community or being involved in a writer's workshop, just being in touch with our community in a face-to-face manner, thinking about how we can literally love our neighbor, see who's around us, see what we can do to help somebody um, in whatever kind of need they might be in, and do it whether it is something financial or something that giving some of our time, volunteering, checking in on somebody that we haven't checked in on in a while, in a I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words, in an embodied way, in a like a real physical way, as opposed to like all this, a lot of what we do that isn't, that's kind of, either on our own or just on the internet. Lent is a great way to kind of get out of that space and into the world again. Um, and I think that kind of participation in our community too can really nourish us as writers as well.
Thank you both for that dialogue. Are there others who want to come off mute and add? Again, a couple people commented in the chat. You may want to expand on what you said, or others want to chime in.
Can I jump in?
Yes, go ahead, please.
My name's Joanna. I'm new here too, although I've been getting your emails for ages. I just was so drawn to actually just the fact that you're a mom and writer. That's what drew me today. But one thing that struck me, I've been writing for a long time, but I've never had anything published. And today, and I've been thinking, why haven't I done anything about Lent this year? And as I was sitting down today, it occurred to me that perhaps I'm not supposed to give something up this year, but perhaps I'm supposed to pick up my pen and actually just commit myself to writing for a certain amount of time every day. So your ideas have been very helpful and inspiring. And yeah, especially that idea of habit stacking. And I already have tried doing that with exercise and reading the Bible, which that is a habit for me now. So now exercise is also a habit. So maybe you can layer on a third one of writing. So thank you for the encouragement.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and Phoebe, maybe you can say a little bit more about, I think it's a really common sort of, I don't know, misconception is the right word, but sort of misperception that Lent is this time for like giving something up, like we're diet, like a diet culture, as opposed to like, this is a time to draw closer to the divine. And so like what I really appreciated about Joanna's comment is like, how can I do more that might connect me to my center or to God, how that is understood. So you can probably say more about that than I said just briefly, but wanted to see if I got that right.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually prefer to use the term making room. And there's a children's book author, Laura Alary, who wrote a Lent book called Make Room. And I really just loved that phrase. It's not that we're giving up, it's that we're making room. And so we're removing stuff that's actually kind of taken up too much space in our lives, whether it's in our time or in our physical space. And so we're making room for the things that we really need and want during this time. So for example, when we talk about social media fast, it's not because we're giving up social media so much as it's because it has taken up too much and we need to put it back in its rightful place. And so we make room for the things that are more important to us. And social media is just one of them. Food, for example, in the like I mentioned, in the Orthodox Church, where there is a specific period of, there are specific foods that we don't eat, and the specific period of abstinence, that is actually meant not so much about, it's not about giving up, it's actually about taking what we haven't eaten and what we haven't spent on food and giving it to the poor. It is actually directly linked to almsgiving. It's directly linked to considering our community. And so it's part of that too, is that it could be that food also has become an excess in our lives, and we're making room for and to kind of reducing its maybe outsized role in our lives. And we're also taking that excess and returning it, because again, when I talk about returning it in the book, we're talking about the fact that everything that we have is a gift from God anyway. And so it is, in a sense, returning it and giving it to those who don't have those, because we really shouldn't have that much excess in the first place. And that's kind of part of the thing about Lent, is that whatever we gain in Lent isn't something that we're going to lose after Lent too. And that's really important too. It's kind of like we discover it's a time for us to kind of stop and say, has there been excess and disorder in our lives, and let's correct that. And really focus this time on correcting it. And so when Lent is over, it's not that we go back to our old habits again. No, it's that we've refreshed ourselves and we're ready for a different path after that.
Thank you so much. And Joanna, welcome. We just have a couple minutes left. Is there anyone with a burning question or comment who wants to come off, or not burning? Don't be shy. Okay, I'm just scrolling through if I'm missing you, please, Anne, go ahead. I see your hand up. Do you want to come off mute? Oh, hold on. You're going to have, Anne, if you want to speak, you're going to have to unmute.
Sorry. No, I was actually very, that last comment really spoke to me. for a strange reason, I received a lot more Social Security this month than I normally do. And I realized, wow, that's in excess. Now, how can I use some of that money, if not all of that money, to help other people? So I really enjoy the idea of thinking of what have I done or received in excess that I can give away. And in terms of writing, I am writing I'm writing to understand what I believe spiritually. And until I can put it into words, it's vague. And in trying to put it into words, I know what I don't believe, which is almost a good way to start with what I don't believe and then hone it down to what do I believe.
Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely. I think a lot of us kind of sometimes work out our spirituality in our words, in our writing. You know, so I think, I think you're not alone in that, in that, in that practice there.
Thanks, Anne. Phoebe, maybe I can draw us to one other thought and see what you think about it, which is, again, something I really appreciated about your book and your discussion was sort of thinking of Lent as a time of preparation. So as this discussion's been unfolding, I've been thinking about my own Lenten practices and intentions. And, I really appreciated your comment in the beginning, and we were putting together this talk about Lent, maybe a time for rest and restoration, and maybe a time for, again, maybe the excess has been you've been trying to force yourself to write and you need sort of a break from that sort of excessive pressure. But also maybe you're getting ready for like a new big project, and that may sort of be part of your Eastertide. And so this may be a time, and I'm thinking about that for myself as I'm contemplating a new potential book project. Is this a time of sort of getting ready and preparing? Anyway, I just wanted to sort of bring that to the conversation and see what you think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's worth, when when you're thinking about a big project, is to take some time to let it simmer before diving right in. Kind of wrestle with it in your mind, before delving right into the outlining, or what we usually do, or the delving into like tons of research. Just kind of sitting with it for a bit, letting it kind of, sometimes one thing I like to do sometimes is, um, if I have an idea, thinking about it actually right before bed, um, and falling asleep on some of those thoughts. Um, I don't know what happens, but I feel like, the next day, uh, either something happens in my dreams or something happens in the synapses or whatever, whatever scientifically happens to us when we go to bed. I often find the next day I've had some new insights, um, that I didn't have the night before when I was thinking about it. Um, so yeah, absolutely. It could be exactly what you said, Kate, about, kind of thinking it more of in terms of preparation than just jumping right into the project.
Well, thank you so much. Well, we're just about at time. I just want to end by thanking you again, Phoebe. I agree. You've just been so generous with your wisdom and your time. For those of you who haven't checked out Phoebe's book, I really encourage you to. It's lovely and helpful and inspiring and encouraging. Again, the title is Hunger for Righteousness: A Lenten Journey Towards Intimacy with God and Loving Our Neighbor. And I also put in the chat, if you want to follow more of Phoebe's work, you can follow her online, I think at beingincommunity.com. So you can find her there. And Phoebe, do you want to say anything in closing just before we close out the session?
Sure. I actually want to share one more way that you can also engage with me, and that is that I do have a Substack newsletter. And one kind of new thing that I did for this book, I'm actually trying to get where's my subscribe link here so I can get it for you. What I've done with this book is I have done a podcast series that is linked to each chapter in the book, and I deliberately did it in a very like limited way because I had always toyed with the idea of doing a podcast, but I wasn't sure if that's something I would want to do for like a a longer period of time. And so I thought it would be a fun way to kind of engage with the topics of this book by doing like a limited series with like one podcast for each chapter and having conversations with different people about what's in them. And so it's been really a lot of fun. I've had some great conversations, and each of my guests have provided like even more insight to some of the topics and given me even more ideas and food for thought um, on these things. And it also taught me that I'm not sure if I'm up to a regular an ongoing podcast. I think I'm going to be really happy when those 11 or 12 episodes are done and I can take a rest from that too. So if you wanted to hear that podcast as well, you could go to that link to my Substack and subscribe, and then you'll get to see all the other episodes and then get emailed when the new ones get posted.
Well, I think that actually that last comment is a great one too, which is this is maybe a season for trying things out. I've been praying with an icon for the first time. So like Lent can also be a time for trying things out and deciding maybe what will become a permanent practice, like having a podcast or not. So I think that's a great seasonal idea too that sort of popped up at the end. Well, thank you all so much, and maybe join me in a virtual round of applause for Phoebe, and thank you all for being here with Writing for Your Life. And Phoebe, blessings as you continue to launch your book and to offering your wisdom during this Lenten season. Grateful for you.
Thank you. And I'm grateful for all of you joining in as well, and all of your comments and ideas. You've also enriched me with your being here. So thank you all so much.
Thanks again, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everybody.